on. Excellent. So I think everybody is joined that is going to be joining for the time being. And those of you that have to jump off, do so as needed. So welcome back, Elizabeth. We have missed you and glad to have you back on board. So thank you. And also thank you to Claire and Diana and everybody who's kept us rolling while Elizabeth has been out. So it's been pretty seamless, as I'm sure you're quite aware. And we had a great symposium too. So much to catch you up on. And then also welcome to Alicia as her first meeting as vice chair. So that's pretty exciting too. And let's see, so we are recording both the visual and audio of Teams today and from now on. And so the recording will be seen in the upper left-hand side of your screen, just to be sure that we're on. And if you see that that's not on, and it should be, please let us know, since this is new. So according to the agenda, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the meeting minutes from our August 2024 meeting. I think David made a motion. He's on mute.
I can second. This is David. I will make that motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David and Will. Do we have any corrections, comments? Not hearing any. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Excellent. So I'm going to turn it over to Claire and we're going to talk about the scheduling poll.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've got 13 people have completed the poll. So we do need everyone to complete it so we can determine if we need to move our meetings back to the morning. So I'm going to put it in the chat. If you would like, if you don't remember if you've done it, raise your hand and I can tell you if you've done it or not. Allison Lowe, you have not. So if you can do that right now. We have about 5 minutes for folks to just do this now so that we can have it done. Other folks that are here that haven't done it. Tyler, David, if you could also do it. And we've got all. Catherine's got it.
Hey, Claire, can you verify that Steve Collier has an invite?
He does have the invite and he will be joining at 1:15.
Perfect. Thank you. I just don't see him on the invite on my side.
I sent him his own one so that he wouldn't have to have the full like 3 hour.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Seeing these responses come in.
Claire,
Yes.
this is a stupid question, but this is also the programming and performance poll, isn't that correct? Or
We'll be discussing those. No, this.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that other link.
Did you see the link that I put in the chat?
Oh no, I didn't.
Sorry. Yes, not over email, in the chat.
Chat. Okay.
The quickest way
Sorry
to find
about
it.
that.
No worries. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm seeing all these responses now. It looks like Sarah Isham, we would still need to hear from, but tentatively it is looking like folks are more available in the morning and prefer the morning. I believe Kathy, you were the one with the main morning conflict. So maybe we can connect separately about that, or if you have like really strong reservations.
Yeah, and I can,
I want to voice
it's,
them now.
yeah, Claire, I can try to move things around too, knowing
Okay.
that we're coalescing around it. So, okay.
Yeah, is anyone feeling strongly opposed to moving meetings back to the third Tuesday morning? Again, that would be mostly 10 to 12, sometimes a 9 to 1 for the longer meetings, which we would only have 2 of this year. Okay. And does anyone have an issue with making that switch for the October meeting? So starting immediately next month.
What's the date of that?
The date of that, I believe, is the 23rd,
Thank you.
Tuesday, October 22nd, excuse me.
And we'd start at 10.
Correct.
Yeah, Claire, I won't be able to make that one.
I have a conflict, just so you
Okay,
know.
so let's keep October as is scheduled in the afternoon. And then that would mean that it would be the November 19th. We would start meeting in the morning if that works for you, Allison.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Claire, I
Okay.
have the October meeting the week prior on the 15th. I'm not sure if that's wrong.
oh, that is correct. I'm sorry. It is October 15th. I believe.
Yeah. So I have a standing HR meeting every other week on Tuesdays at 9. So if we start at 10, I'm fine. But if we go to 9, it could be an issue. We'll have to move them. But I'll just let Terry know.
Okay. Okay. All right. So the tentative decision that we're making now is to move to the morning starting November of this year. So I will double check with the folks that are not here and didn't complete the poll, which I think is just a couple of them, but that will be our tentative decision, and I will move the invites. And if if it turns out it's causing issues, we can always go back, or if anyone wants to email me anything to discuss about this separately, we can do that.
And I'm assuming you're going to correct the invites after this
Yes.
meeting. Okay.
Yeah.
So Ellen just joined us, and Ellen, we're going to be moving our meeting times to the morning starting in November. Excellent.
Right.
All right, so you have everybody you need. We're going to be waiting for Steve Collier to join us, which he should be here in 3-4 minutes. Just text him, see if he can join early. Now's your chance to ask questions of Steve after he does his presentation, so please don't be shy if you have questions.
This is Abby. Can I just quickly jump in? I have a question around the calendar. I know I came on a few minutes late, but we had talked about at the symposium about possibly eliminating certain meetings if they weren't decision meetings or making them shorter.
That's correct. We
missed
did
that.
talk about that. And I think right now we weren't planning to like wholesale eliminate any, like making that decision right now. Right now, I think the invites have been sent through the end of this calendar year. And yeah, I think it's an open question. I think probably we need to sit down and map out what the agendas might be for those non-decision meetings. And I think we're certainly open to shortening them or eliminating them or using them for committee time if needed. But yeah, I would say we have not made any specific progress on wholesale canceling any, or definitely shortening some.
Which we will in due time. Excellent. So we'll welcome Steve Collier, our General Counsel at the Agency of Ag. And we're here to talk about our meetings and the new law that has passed and the reason why we're recording our meetings. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and if you have questions, please ask. I will watch for hands.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Allison. Pleasure to be here. Good to see all of you. I think I'm going to start by asking you all if you want to go into executive session, because I'm hoping to give you legal advice. And so if you choose not to if you choose to disregard my legal advice or otherwise have a different opinion, you don't necessarily want a recorded record of that.
Excellent. So I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session. Ellen, thank you. Second.
I'll do that.
Ellen can't vote.
I can't.
Oh, sorry, I saw a hand, right?
I just went like
Oliver?
this, like I'm good with
Gotcha.
that, but I can't make
Oliver
a
and
motion.
Kathy, thank you. Appreciate
I
it.
can
All
make
those
that
in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
nay. Excellent. Claire, we shall stop the recording and we'll start up when we come out of executive session. And screen. So if you're questioning, look to the up. Excellent. So we're coming out of executive session, just received legal advice on the open meeting law and no action taken. So we will continue on to our agenda item for 2 p.m. Working on our work and lands program and performance metrics. And I'm going to turn it over to Claire for that.
Thank you. So everyone should have received in their packet an updated version of the program and performance metrics that we workshopped at the symposium. So we have about 45 minutes that we can use all of or none of to finalize this document to a point where we can adopt it as a board, and it will become, we would then be officially adopting our new mission and vision statements. And we would be adding this to our organizational plan and potentially publicly sharing more about our strategies and metrics, and then staff would begin reorganizing our data systems to align with the updated metrics. So I think we'll go piece by piece. Did anyone have specific questions, comments, or concerns on the vision statement? And I can share my screen if people prefer. So just let me know. I will read the updated vision statement that we came up with at the symposium, which is what is up for vote today, which is our shared working landscape is the foundation of Vermont's evolving culture, vibrant economies, healthy ecosystems, and sense of place. All right, so hearing no comments, I think we can take that as an informal approval and move on. And I think we'll vote on the whole document at the end. That works. So then moving on to the mission statement, our updated mission statement is to make strategic investments and develop policy recommendations that support a sustainable farm, food, and forest economy in Vermont. Any comments, questions, concerns on this mission statement? Donna.
Yeah, I thought at one point somebody had thought that we should replace the word sustainable with something.
That was, yes, there was a discussion about having vibrant in the mission statement in addition to sustainable. And I think where we landed was having vibrant economies in the vision statement, and we didn't want to also have the word vibrant in both. I think the consensus, please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, the consensus at the symposium was to keep the word sustainable, but we wanted an acknowledgement somewhere that this is like a holistic definition of sustainability that isn't purely focused on climate. And then I think the other word that was being floated was vibrant. But someone else can chime in if you have a different understanding of what the discussion was. Donna, do you have a suggestion for removing sustainable or changing it?
No, I just remembered there was some
Okay.
discussion about using that as the only word. In that it sort of indicates stagnant, not growing or changing, sustainable.
Does anyone else have thoughts about feeling strongly that you want to keep it, or you want to change it, or you want to add another word to the mission statement? All right, hearing none. We will informally approve that one and move on. The statewide indicators was not something we'd discussed at length as a group. I think it's something we discussed in our committee, subcommittee that worked on this extensively and with certain individuals that provided additional feedback. These are more just informal pieces of data that we want to be aware of that are related to our vision statement. So does anyone have concerns, questions, comments on the statewide indicators? I do know yesterday, Chris and I were chatting as I was catching him up on the symposium, and he had a suggestion around, we have an indicator around the percent of total food purchase in Vermont annually that's locally sourced, around whether we should have an indicator of the same thing for wood products, which I think would be great, but I don't think that data exists right now. So these can be fluid, and as more data exists, we can choose to swap out and add in if needed.
Do you want to put them up on the screen, Claire, so we can see if there's a motion to approve?
I don't think we want to make any motions yet. I think we just want to go through the whole document.
Okay.
Oh, and I see Liz, thank you, had noted that she was advocating for vibrant in the either vision or mission statement, but likes where it lands. But do people want me to share my screen to show these? Would that be better? Okay. I'm
we'll
seeing
just-
some nods. And
You wish to approve them at the end, correct? Individually.
I think we just want to approve the whole document at the end.
Okay, perfect. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. All right, moving on to the program operational measures, which again, we also have not extensively discussed. These are pieces of data that staff are mostly already routinely collecting that we report on, more to report just the general, what are we doing? And they're less specifically related to measuring the performance of our strategies. And I believe there were some additions to those based on the symposium discussion.
Just so you know, we're not seeing your screen.
Yeah, it seemed like some people didn't want it to be shared. Some people were shaking their head, but I can share it
Okay.
if people prefer. Okay, I will share it. And if anyone would like me to stop sharing, just let me know.
Excellent.
Claire, can I risk regressing us by revisiting the
Mhm.
missions briefly?
Yep.
Speaking to what Donna raised, is there a desire for like an action-oriented word that is talking about overcoming the potential perceived stagnancy? Like, I guess a word that I throw in out there is sustainable and resilient farm, food, and forest economy in Vermont. I feel pretty neutral about it overall, but just putting that out there.
Is anyone feeling strongly in favor or opposed
Didn't
to
we
the
actually,
suggestion?
weren't we playing around with that word resilient at our retreat?
Resilient is in one of the strategies.
Oh, okay.
That was a big focus. I don't believe it came up in one of these, but we can certainly add it in.
I would be amenable to that. I mean, resilient, while it's something, it's a word that gets used a lot, just like sustainable. I mean, it does talk about it does connote that you can bounce back, that you can adapt, that you can withstand adversity and still make it.
Does anyone disagree with the addition of resilient here?
I like the inclusion of it because it also, it has the subtext of climate change. embedded in it.
This is David. How about saying support a resilient and sustainable? Switch those locations
Switching the
around.
order. Anyone opposed to the mission statement as it stands now? Want to make additional changes or remove what has been added? All right, hearing none, I'm going to keep moving forward, but if people want to take us back at any point, we can do that. We're moving on from the indicators, and I will note Allison Lowe, we also were chatting yesterday and had discussed the potential to add an indicator around farms experiencing crop loss due to climate change. And I think the indicators can be more in flux and we can choose to add or take away those more regularly. Okay, so moving on to the operational measures, which again, these are sort of more just basic summary data points that we, for the most part, already collect. Scroll.
I just wanted to make, I had one note, Claire, I thought might be helpful for the board, which is on the stage of development. I just wanted to everybody that the businesses to like identify their stage of development. It's a self-determination and there are definitions linked in the application. But I just think it's important to recognize that. So sometimes like the definition that a business chooses for themselves might not be the definition that I would choose for them, for example. Like they might be a very new business in like a startup, what I would consider to be a startup phase, but they identify as growth. So just, I think it's important just for us to know that internally. I think it's still a great indicator, but.
Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, can we add one more category there? Is just mature? Startup, growth, mature.
Yeah, that is actually, I think, one of these. I think these are just examples.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there are more options that a business can choose here.
I think there's like 5, right?
Yeah, and sometimes we collapse them down and just report on new versus
Yep.
not new. Yeah.
Not that I'm ever mature, but.
Any other?
Yeah, I have one question. Just the total number of acres impacted by business grantees. Is this specifically ag? Or are we?
No, I think this would be anyone that opted to like describe the acres that they operate on, basically.
Okay.
So I think, yes, this one, as we've discussed, I think will be somewhat subjective, but because it's an operational measure and less performance specific, I think that's okay.
But, and then I just, like, the other question that I had on this was like, is the board, is the interest, like, because there's 2 different questions. It's like number of acres in production and then like new production. This would be both. We would be adding both of those up. Is that?
I think this one, it would just be like the acres in production when we receive at the time of the application.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
And the performance measure is around if there are new acres added.
Yeah, below, yeah.
I'm going to move on to strategy number 1, which is to strengthen working lands business viability and resiliency by providing access to capital. So this is the one where we've combined what was formerly strategy 1 and strategy 3. Strategy 1 was around viability and focused mostly on profit and revenue, and strategy 3 was around resiliency, focused on those more other pieces like jobs, acres, land management, worker well-being, and climate adaptation. So those have been combined into one, as suggested at the symposium. What we stayed separate was strategy 2 around the service providers is still separate. There was a discussion that we would collapse all 3 of those. So if anyone feels really strongly about that, that is open for discussion.
I love the combination. I was telling Claire when I was reviewing the work that you all did, like how good this document looks, first of all, and I also love the combinations that have happened personally.
All right, let's keep moving. And if anyone needs me to go back, just speak up. Strategy 2 is to increase working lands businesses' knowledge, skills, and profitability by investing in an array of business support services. And then the performance measures continue here. Is anyone feeling strongly that this should be collapsed into strategy number 1? Or are people okay that it has remained separate? And I believe we added these performance measures around producer associations at the symposium. We didn't have any metrics around that before.
Claire, I'm curious. Some of the first 2 measures reference, maybe this is, I'm sorry, if we'd go back to strategy 1 just for a second, the 2 years following. So that's, to me, seems like a significant difference in some ways between strategy 1 and strategy 2. So strategy 1 is relying upon that kind of relatively anonymous survey results that we get from grantees follow-up survey, right?
Yes. Yeah, this information for strategy 1.
This information, these performance measure outcomes. So I guess
it's not anonymous, though. It is.
Well, sorry, I don't mean anonymous. I mean voluntary. It's not like a requirement at that point. So I was curious, both, like, is that a reason to keep these performance measures separate, since this is related to data that we often collect? And then I was going to ask, what percentage of grantees do we typically get that?
It's about 40 to 60. And yeah, so the reason I think that strategy 1, that these measures were shown as 2 years, was that that's when we're more likely to see a change, versus sometimes right at the end of the grant, we haven't actually seen these kinds of results. I think we could decide that that's okay, and we would rather get really specific information from everybody right when the grant ends, which maybe wouldn't show as much progress as we would see 2 years later. But yeah, typically when we've surveyed grantees 2 years out, I think we get information from about half. Yeah, I don't know if Abby, you want to respond, or if Liz, if your question is related.
My question is different from Abby's.
Okay.
I had noted a question that's similar to Abby's, which is it's just about whether we want to identify a time frame for the same reason that you just noted, Claire, that, we recognize that, like, these changes take time, because you have to, like, implement the strategy that you've been learning,
Right.
like with the service provider, and there is no time frame.
So we could just take the time frame out, and then as staff, we can include that as part of our data planning.
We could
is
do
what you're
that.
saying. I think that would make sense.
Or yeah, I mean, that's an idea, but
I will remove these for now. Liz, do you want to answer your question or ask your question?
Yeah, I was just hoping for a reminder on like exactly how much of this is required from everyone, both for strategy 1 and 2. It sounds like strategy 1, it's an anonymous or not anonymous, it's a voluntary survey that happens at certain points with all businesses who have gotten a grant. And are they asked to answer every single one of these? And then similarly for strategy 2, like will all service
Right.
providers be responsible for answering all of these? Or is
I
that
think
not
it would,
necessary?
I think in both cases, it would depend on whether the project was related to those things. I think we would ask these income questions of all business grantees. But I don't think, I think all of, I guess to answer your question, Liz, like we haven't actually asked about all of these things before. I think in the past, we've only asked about job sales and acres. So I think it would be on the table, but I don't think the idea is that we ask everybody everything because we know not all grantees are having impacts in every area. So it would just be the ones that are related to their projects. But I don't think we've thought through the exact mechanism.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
that's great to know. And I think just the ability to have people focus on the things that are most relevant to their project and say if something's not relevant, I don't have to.
Right, because
do the
yeah,
answer.
the change we've implemented is that in the application, they identify which of these pieces are relevant, and so that in the reporting, we would say, okay, you identified that these are the things that are relevant, so let's get the information about them.
Awesome, thank you.
I think there's, and Liz, just to add one other thought for the strategy 2, we also, the service providers, I think, as far as executing this, there'll be a question on it as to whether the service provider is collecting the information from the business, or how that's going to be coordinated, right?
Yeah, and I would like my reaction to that is that it makes sense for the service provider to collect it rather than their, potentially some clients aren't gonna have interfaced with working lands at all.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
So it can feel really removed.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And but I think it is good to recognize that this is going to be a bit of a new ask for service providers, which, the board, we all should be aware of. This would be, we've tried, Liz, I know you're aware of this pretty acutely. Like we have tried to just let service providers identify like how they're going to be monitoring success, and then like offering that information in their final reports. But this would require us to identify some specific information that we're going to be wanting, right?
Yeah, and I would just say not every service provider project is going to have all of these impacts. So as long as not everyone is required to report on all of them, that makes a ton of sense. And you could even run these by whoever selected this year and say like, is there anything really missing? Like, or anything that you really couldn't report on and work on it? Like, there's not going to be that many projects this year in this category. It's hard for me to think super critically about this because I can answer all of those with my existing evaluation process. So I like I might not have a great head for, knowing which ones are really hard, but I wouldn't advocate that people who, programs that aren't doing comprehensive like work on financial statements be asked to collect that kind of information, for example. It just doesn't, it would be probably a waste of time and give you potentially inaccurate information. But some of the other ones farther down in the performance measures are really different and could be collected across a wide range of types of services.
Any other comments or suggestions for strategy 2 around service providers? Okay. Hearing none. Strategy 3 is to increase investments and business supports to historically underserved and or marginalized communities by reducing barriers to submitting successful grant applications. Oh, and this should say, yeah.
Claire, can you go up a little bit, please?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's total funding awarded toward projects or businesses. Should that too be a percentage?
I think the next one is a percent. I think that one we were interested in capturing both the total funding and the percent. It might turn out as we do this that one of them ends up makes more sense to report on and we drop one.
It seems a little redundant, or that the total funding doesn't necessarily tell us much, but that's just my thoughts.
Are other folks wanting to remove the total funding? Folks seem neutral. Maybe we leave it in, and I think that would be something that would be easy to just drop without further approval. It's not useful.
And certainly not all of this data will be like share, it's not going to be used in communications, like in our impact report, for example. Some of it's just for like internal record keeping. And to know the percent, we'll have to, know the total anyway.
Claire, my curiosity came with the number of administrative barriers addressed. So do we have a current list of barriers, and are we measuring, against that list, or is this the applicant identifying barriers to us and we are collecting them and reporting, and we're quantifying them?
That's a good question. This was one that was added at the symposium that I just left in here and admittedly did not maybe think clearly about. I don't think we don't have a formal list. I think it would be very easy for us to come up, based on feedback we've received. And certainly even this year, there are lots of things we're doing to continue to reduce the barrier. So I think it could be the first thing. We also are wanting to survey grantees and applicants, which is not something we've done recently, but have done, I think, 5 or so years ago.
So when I saw you all, that the symposium participants added this, in my mind, and again, this is like, I imagine that we would actually just have a list of the administrative barriers that we've been working on, and like that would be the number. But like the actual like list of barriers addressed would be the more interesting information to have a record of, right? Cause maybe we'll be able to address one or two every year, but we'll have, the number is actually not going to be that interesting, but I think this sort of being aware of recording the barriers that we are working on and having like a record of that could be quite interesting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my curiosity came with, is there any prioritization? Can we understand what the barriers are? Can we quantify, if you will, the high priority and prioritize the barriers so that they become part of an action list to negate the barrier, right? So if technology, language, I don't know what the list is composed of today. So I was trying to figure out, what does this mean? And, are we trying to get a broad assessment? What are the barriers? If we know the barriers, are we trying to reduce them in some prioritized way? Because more and more people are identifying these are the top 3 barriers that face them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think it's something that probably as staff, we have a lot of this in our head, or a lot of it's related to ongoing agency of agriculture, equity conversations, agriculture development division. So, but I think what you're suggesting, I think would be a really good idea for us to actually just get this on paper and prioritize, because I think sometimes the priority is based on, oh, I'm updating the RFA and let me change this section that I know people get confused by because I'm doing it right now. And that's easy versus, there's also a lot of there's an update to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and I've been trying to make sure I'm using the right PowerPoint templates for our applicant webinars. So stuff like that is all just kind of, honestly in my brain, and I should write it down. And I think as needed, involve the board or as staff, just have a more strategic plan for like reducing those based on priority.
But just to clarify for Kathy, we don't currently have a prioritized list, which is, I think, what Claire is saying. It's a good idea, and I agree. And that would obviously be revisited every year. I would, think.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I was just thinking about it in terms of not only serving the applicant, but also, what would I say, prioritizing what might be staff resources, time, if you will, and energy around the high priority ones, recognizing that there's many, many things that, staff does throughout this process.
Yeah. Allison?
Yeah, this was a question that I was kind of struggling with on an earlier grant application, and I noticed that applicants answered some of these questions differently from one application to the next. And one applicant appeared to interpret like supporting historically underserved by saying that we don't discriminate. I mean, well, you're not supposed to. And he said, well, we have an employee who's underserved or marginalized community. So how do we define what support means?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we talked some about this at the June symposium, that we're going to provide some clearer guidance for applicants around that. But I think ultimately it is subjective, and there won't be a way to, fully like assess. I think we have to take what people say at face value with that.
And I think just with that, like some responses will be less compelling than others, just like all of the other application questions. Right? So like, because it is somewhat subjective, as reviewers, we're going to have to say, okay, that was a really compelling. Or, the example maybe, Allison, that you gave, like, okay, that's not a super compelling response in how like this business is impacting marginalized communities or historically underserved or marginalized communities.
All right, continuing on to our last strategy is the policy strategy, which is to improve the operating environment for Vermont's agriculture and forestry businesses by serving as a credible and trusted voice to raise awareness and collaborate with partners about laws and policies that impact working lands businesses. And there were, I think, 2 different suggestions for how to update this one, and I believe what's here somewhat integrates both of them. So if folks are feeling like it's confusing or you want to change anything, now it's your chance. All right, seeing none.
Would
Commissioner Wolf.
regulations be part of policies?
I believe so. Laws and policies. Regulations are laws, right? Or I guess sometimes the rules are not actually.
Not laws.
A
Laws
law.
are signed like statute.
Okay.
Policies are policies. And then
Do you want to
there's,
add regulations?
regulatory authority and maybe there's, I don't know. I'm trying to think about some of the ways that that we might be asked to or see a need to engage in an opinion.
Yeah, I would just offer that, at least from the agency's perspective, our regulatory authority is either provided through law or rulemaking, and rulemaking is usually identified in a policy recommendation. So I don't think it hurts to include it, Will, just to be more explicit, but I think it was intended to be captured in either the combination of law or policy. Again, I hear your point, and I think it could be valuable to call it out.
Anyone opposed to adding regulations in here? I can also move it to a different part of the phrase. Yeah. Does anyone want to go back to any other sections of this document?
Claire, I just wanted to, it was minor. I think we want to add worker owner well-being, just like worker / owner well-being in
Here. Oh yeah, actually I think we'd actually wanted to change it just to. We had a discussion at some point, maybe in the committee, about having it just be owner, because the owner is the person generally that is providing the information, and presumably they would be able to speak for the overall worker well-being, but not always. But I guess we could put it as worker owner, and we can work out those details on our own. All right. So just to summarize the changes that we made today, we added resilient to the mission statement. We added maturity as an example here. We removed the time frame from the data in strategy 1. We changed this to worker owner. We also removed the time frame from strategy 2. And oops, I believe, and then we added regulations to strategy 4. Would anyone like to make any final changes? All right. Any questions or comments before we vote?
Sounds pretty quiet.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Sounds great. Should be looking to, for a motion to approve the Oregon Lands Enterprise Initiative Program and Performance Metrics as edited by Claire.
So moved.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you. Do you have any comments? Not hearing any. All those approve, say aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Motion carries. Thank you for that. All right, now we're going to take a 5-minute break. And it is currently 2:42, so I would ask that we come back no later than 2:47.
Should I keep recording or stop it?
You can stop it. Yep, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Feel free to shut your cameras off. Excellent. Welcome back. And following break, we're going to move on to the approval of the eligibility criteria for the business enhancement grants. And I'll let you take that away, Claire.
All right. I'll bring my screen up. Well, before I do that, so this is a follow-on to our conversation from the June symposium where we talked pretty extensively about grant eligibility. And yeah, I think relating to our last conversation around barriers, we're always looking to make our guidance clearer so that folks know who's eligible, and, you know, potentially updating our eligibility based on funding amounts to, you know, focus on a specific group or whatever it may be. So mostly just wanted to run a few specific pieces of language by the board and then propose one other potential change that I didn't put in the agenda. So with that, I will share my screen. And we're not looking to vote on this or anything, Allison. This is just to get feedback. Since staff, we will continue to be workshopping some of the specific language here. So this is more just to answer some bigger questions around the eligibility for this year. So I've highlighted the text here that's new. I don't think so I guess starting with the eligible applicants question, the first question I had for folks was around, we talked about making that distinction between sort of land-based, soil-based, wanting to exclude things like exclusively indoor grown mushrooms, cannabis, hydroponics, aquaculture. And so I wanted to make sure that this statement here that says businesses that exclusively grow food indoors, gives those examples, are not eligible. I wanted to make sure that reflects that's what I heard from the board in June. What I've been hearing over the years as we've gotten applications from these types of businesses, that's not really what we're looking to fund. And I know that there was some tension of, we don't want to wholesale exclude projects that are just about growing food indoors, or like in a greenhouse, because we want to be able to fund some of that. We want to fund some maybe climate transition projects that maybe are related to some form of indoor growing, but that the business would still need to have a connection to the working landscape. So hence the businesses that exclusively grow food indoors are not eligible. But I want to make sure that folks don't feel like that's leaving someone out that we would be interested in seeing an application from.
I think this is feeling like pretty clear for now.
Mm-hmm.
And I also am worried that there's going to be things we didn't think of.
Yeah.
And circumstances that like this, that we've, you know, made a mistake in some way. And I do think it's a little bit of a tricky one. you know, in the farm and forest viability program, we don't currently exclude indoor growing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what I think we should do. Like, I think it's much more fair to reflect how generally how low those have been in the priority list for the board consistently over time, so that people don't spend a lot of time applying if they're not going to score highly. But I wouldn't be surprised if this generates a lot of questions, potential concerns. Yeah.
I think that's spot on list with my thought. Yeah, for example, I did last week hear from a microgreens business that grows them, I think, fully indoors, maybe in a shipping container or something. So I was saying that we finalizing this question. So again, my understanding is that those have been low on the priority list. We're not saying those things aren't agriculture. I think we're with this trying to make the decision to exclude them just so we don't waste people's time.
Yeah, and I mean, I personally feel really mixed about this one. And I think it's always hard to have like, yeah, I don't know. I'm personally struggling with this one, and I don't know where else to go with that. Mostly for the reason that we see lots of people doing, indoor growing because it's so much more reliable and we need food.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that too. Just as a mushroom growing family personally, that a lot of mushrooms grown indoors are grown on sawdust, which sort of makes it like a semi forest product. And that's it's neither animal nor plant, and so mushrooms are in a category of their own anyway. But yeah, I would it's hard to have simplicity on this, but would just advocate that even folks who aren't growing outdoors are still contributing to our food system, and that a lot of folks were even funding to grow, in different methods, funding them to diversify or, hoop houses and different methods of growing. And so that maybe for a future conversation about if someone wants to diversify and they traditionally grow outdoors, but are looking to do something like this to expand their business, it would be worth considering whether that's something the board's interested in.
Yeah, so just to be clear, my understanding with this language was that if it was a business that is growing things outdoors but wants to do the project or also grows thing indoors, that would still be eligible. But that what I've heard is that there is not interest in funding businesses that are 100% indoor. So that's just what this is reflecting. But again, if folks feel like you want to have all of these types of businesses be eligible, we can certainly do that. I do not have an opinion either way. I just want to accurately reflect what the board wants to do.
I think these came about because we're the working lands board, and if you're not working the land, the project's probably not eligible.
Right. That was a conversation that we'd had, which again was reflecting here.
And so that's why I think that saying exclusively is what differentiates it. You could grow a portion of your stuff indoors. You could have a project that is based indoors, but if you're exclusively growing food indoors, it's hard to argue that you're working the land. You could be doing it in the middle of a city, right?
Is anyone feeling really opposed? Oh, yeah, go ahead, Liz.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we have an opportunity to clarify that more than we have right now. So this bullet could say, this grant is focused on businesses that are working. I don't know. This is like all semantics kind of to some extent. This grant is focused on working landscape businesses.
Yeah.
if you exclusively grow food indoors, like we're happy to make other recommendations for grants or
Yeah.
something like that. I mean, I think if we're going to exclude them, be 100% clear about that so people don't waste their time. And I think it might be nice to be able to say, like, you know, right now we've seen that these are not scoring as highly, but here's some, you know, historically we've seen these don't score as highly. Here's some other recommendations.
Okay, I'll just add a little note for that. Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like basically what I wanted to know. Oh, Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just, I think that our mission statement is really clear on this. I just don't know how indoor only operations add to a sense of place.
Yeah. All right. So I'm hearing there's general support for this concept. I think we'll continue to workshop it and update, especially as I continue to get inquiries from applicants. That usually helps me figure out how we can further refine if people are in that gray area. So that's helpful to know. Okay, so moving on to the forest products businesses. The main piece here is this second bullet around the secondary forestry. So I think for the past 2 years, we've tried to, for folks that are buying in their wood, we had some language around at least half of it should be grown in the Northeast. It seemed like, though, that we were getting applications where there was a lot of wood from the Northeast being used by the business, like say a woodworker, but not a lot of Vermont wood. And it really seemed like there wasn't appetite for those. So my understanding was the suggestion was that a secondary forestry business should be able to identify that some portion, even if it is a small portion, is from Vermont. And that we should have a question around where they can talk about the species mix of wood and as clearly as possible, or as much as they know, identify where their wood might be coming from, knowing that the way the wood supply chain works, a lot of folks don't actually know where the tree was grown. I don't think this is as clear as it could be, because I think based on what people write in the species mix and known origin will leave questions. I do think this is clearer, and I would love to get feedback, especially from the forestry folks on this. Yeah, Chris.
Can I just make a proposal? The secondary forestry business nomenclature, my understanding is, you know, primary is more forestry based and secondary is more wood based. I don't know if anybody would be opposed to just changing that to secondary wood businesses.
Sure.
Only because, yeah, I think the second phase is you know, taking lumber and producing something out of it. I'm torn on the species mix. As somebody that's been in, you know, the business here for 40 years, you know, I've always wanted to see, you know, the sawmills, local sawmills thrive and find customers locally. But unfortunately, the species that are popular right now are not grown here in Vermont. So I'd hate to not score a application highly based on the fact that, you know, they're using some species that customers want but is not grown here. So I'd like to give preferential treatment to people who buy maple, birch, ash, things like that, but I'm afraid that walnut and white oak and hickory are the species that are resonating right now, and those just don't, you know, grow here. So
Okay, so I guess, do you feel like we need to further, like, more clearly exclude those applicants from applying?
no, I guess I'd like to, no, I guess no. I guess just I'd like to score higher the people who do, you know, deal in those species that are grown here versus, you know, species that are grown somewhere else.
So are you just suggesting, Chris, to say more clearly, like, there will be priority given to businesses using a higher percentage of wood sourced in Vermont, like a sentence
Yes.
like that?
Yes.
Okay. Oliver.
Yeah, I would support that. I don't have a huge sample size, but I know some of the former WLEB grantees are not sourcing any wood in Vermont in the secondary wood business category. And one of them used to get wood from A. Johnson. When A. Johnson closed, he began to source wood from a mill in New Hampshire, get some in Massachusetts, and according to him, he just can't get what he needs in Vermont. I don't know how exhaustive his search was, but it's certainly easier to get wood out of state to meet his business needs. So I like the idea of a preferential scoring approach or an advantage if the applicant is able to indicate that they are sourcing some or all of their wood from Vermont, but not exclude people who, for whatever reason, can't source wood in Vermont.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful because basically in the past we had we'd had that preferential local sourcing across the board, and then we realized we actually on the food or ag side wanted to be wholesale excluding people that are not sourcing products from Vermont. It sounds like on the wood side that we sort of tried to do something similar, but just broaden the area. But anyway, I like your suggestion, and I see David was about to speak.
I think we just need to be really careful about how this is all phrased or weighted. Different businesses, the businesses are changing from over time with species mixes according to their customer demands or needs. But at the same time, I think we need to support strongly secondary wood businesses of all sorts, whether they're making high-end kitchen cabinets or furniture or flooring or whatever product, because we don't want to lose these businesses, and they are working on the land. I mean, this is for all intents and purposes, an organic product that's grown on the land. So maybe we need to have a little more regional wood basket outlook. I think it would be different if you're speaking of a tropical wood being brought in. But if it's a wood that's coming out of New England or coming out of what I consider the Northeast, being somewhere in Pennsylvania towards Maine. I'm not saying that we should we're talking about woods outside of, but we just need to be careful that we're not freezing out some peoples that I think could be potentially good businesses that we need to keep and help.
Do you feel like this language here, plus the suggestion by Chris and Oliver, that allows applicants that aren't sourcing, or I guess, do people want to update it to remove the requirement that some portion of wood is grown in Vermont and just have the scoring based on that, and that they could, be sourcing all their wood from New Hampshire and New York or something? Or do people want to leave that so that it's some, but it could be a really small percentage?
I think maybe the best thing to do would be to ask them to weight the percentage. I mean, if they're using 100,000 feet per year and 20 of it comes from Vermont and 80% comes from out of state, ask for those kinds of metric numbers that we can actually see.
Right, and we can certainly ask for that. I think A, the issue is that people don't always know, and B, I guess my question is, do we want to ask for that and not set any eligibility, or do we want to say you should know this, and if it's 0% from Vermont, don't bother applying? Or would we want to let someone in that situation still apply?
Chris, you must have a thought.
Yeah, I'd like to still let them apply, but I'd like to still let them know that sourcing
they'll be
wood
scored lower.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, case in point, Linden Furniture, who I just visited, back in the 80s and early 90s was heavy to yellow birch and hard maple, and sourced it all locally. And then over time, like I mentioned, those species are not in vogue. So now it's white oak and walnut. So they've been forced to go out of state, out of the New England basket to get this type of wood. So hopefully eventually styles change, and they come back to buying hard maple and yellow birch and ash and beech and things like that.
Okay.
So I'd like to, yeah, I guess I'd like to leave it, but just so that they know that we encourage, applicants who buy locally, but not discriminate completely.
Okay. Great. All right. That is really helpful. And we may be in touch with Chris Oliver and David as we refine. Actually don't think we need to talk about the distribution and processing because we workshopped that a lot over the past few years. A question I had that I didn't put in the agenda was around the past grant recipient. So our policy for the last many years has been that if you receive just kind of the business enhancement grant, standard business grant, that one COVID grant, that's sort of our smaller tier, that you can come back again and apply and receive a grant the following year. Where the restriction has come in is that if you receive one of our larger grants, like the supply chain grant, you have to wait 3 years before reapplying. We've also seen that, even with that policy in place, we have awarded a few folks 2 years in a row or 2 years apart instead of 3 years apart that received a business enhancement grant. But I was wondering if, given the limited funds this year and the potential significant demand, if we are going to invite folks that received a grant last year or the year before to reapply, I don't want to be in a situation where we get an application from them and the only reason we don't award it is because they got one recently. I think if we're going to end up excluding folks because of that, we should be clear. And I'm not suggesting that we should make those, that we need to exclude, business enhancement grant recipients from the last 1 to 2 years, but I just want folks to think carefully that put yourself in the position of, in a few months when you see a strong application from a recent grantee, if that is going to make you not want to award it, we should potentially exclude them now so they don't waste their time. Yeah, Liz.
Yeah, I think given how competitive these are going to be, and I'm glad that we're talking about that because I think it's a very natural reaction for any reviewer, whether you're on the board or not, to be like, wow, did we just give this person money? Does this feel fair? So that was one of my main comments, was that I thought we need to look at that. And I feel like it wouldn't be unreasonable to consider either deprioritizing or making ineligible people from last year. Solely due to the competitiveness that we can expect with this amount of money. That's just my personal take on it.
All right, I see Alicia is a thumbs up. I see some nods. All right, so it sounds like the potential proposal is to make ineligible anyone that received, I believe in this case, it would be both the business enhancement grant and that one-time small farm diversification grant last year, that they cannot apply this year. Does anyone feel like we should go further back and either make it 2 years or have it be the same as the impact grants, which is 3 years?
I don't think it's necessary to go further back. Sorry, I was personally just thinking about working lands grants.
Okay.
I hadn't really thought through anything beyond that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. And we don't have to come to an exact decision on this today. Like, we can, workshop and run by the coordinating committee as well. Does anyone
Liz,
oppose?
just to clarify, we are just talking about working lands funding.
I think Liz was saying when I mentioned the small farm, that wasn't something she'd thought about.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Okay.
And I guess then there could be, we could also decide to exclude anyone that received one of those agriculture development grants last year, which were separate from working lands, but overall similar.
Yeah, I would suggest the coordinate, like if we don't have time for further discussion on this, I think that's a great question for the committee. And it seems like no one is reacting negatively to limiting that eligibility around last year's grantees.
Yeah, I think that's the main information I wanted, is whether folks felt overall like that was perhaps a good idea. Okay. Great. The last piece here, or one of the last pieces, we've not typically defined different, like whether different business stages are eligible. I think a lot of people are under the impression that brand new businesses can't apply, which is not true. So I just wanted to add language here that says, yes, any stage of business is eligible, but keep in mind, you have to submit these financial statements and demonstrate your business viability if you're a new business. I don't think we need to like workshop this language now specifically, but I just wanted to make sure folks overall that was reflecting the board's kind of stance that yes, we want to continue receiving applications from all stages of business.
Does this include like pre-production, but they've like registered their business and have a plan, but they haven't started doing anything yet?
I believe in the past there are certain like pre-production businesses that have, yes, there are pre-production businesses that have been funded before that are usually at a much larger scale.
Wow. I mean, I think if that's not up for discussion, that's fine, and it does complicate it. And I guess I wonder similarly, like yeah, I mean, the context is so important here, and it probably, if you
Yeah.
told me who that was, I'd be
I
like,
think in
well, it
some
makes
cases
sense in
that
so many
examples I'm
different ways.
thinking of more
Yeah.
are perhaps on the forest, on like the wood products side of things, potentially.
Yeah. Okay, I won't belabor my point.
All right. And okay, the last piece was around the adding language for cost of doing business types of projects being not as competitive. And again, we're not looking to like fully workshop this language. It is definitely still in draft form. I tried to come up with some examples, or I basically put the examples that folks came up with in June. And so I just wanted to get like an informal pulse check on whether this is the type of thing we want to include in the RFA, which is that basically if a project, more than half of it is for these types of things, we want to wholesale exclude it. I think we could also change the language to just say it won't be as competitive. I think it's clear generally for people to just say yes or no, so they don't waste their time. And again, we will workshop this language further, but
I think you did a nice job on that language, Claire.
Claire, the one I'd be happy to talk to you about offline is the basic health and safety equipment for infrastructure. That's the one that sort of jumped out at me as one needing probably a little bit more conversation.
Yes, that I agree on that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, if you wanted to CC me on that, John, I'd be interested too, because I'm sure it will.
Yeah, and I have a
raise
few
questions.
specific examples that I can like run by all of you that either have been funded in the past or maybe have not been. So I would appreciate, yeah, some specific feedback. That is everything I have to discuss on this. Folks are free to contact me if you have questions or concerns about either anything we discussed or didn't discuss. The business enhancement grant will open on October 18th. So we are aiming to finalize all of these pieces by the end of the month to get everything set up and ready. But I'm hoping that we can, yeah, this clarity will strengthen our applicant pool and make our decision process a lot easier.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Do you wish to move on to site visits and report out? Has anybody gone on site visits? Sin, Chris, Elizabeth. You want to go first, Chris?
Sure. About 2 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of visiting, like I alluded to earlier, Linden Furniture, who's been in business since the late 70s. I met with the CEO, owner, Brian Ball. Got a lovely tour of the plant, where he showed me the new upgrades that they did to their mill. Stop me if I'm wrong. I think they ended up with an infrastructure business grant for $250,000. Was it? Okay. Basically they purchased a new RIP system. They already had one in place, but they had so much success with it that they wanted a second. So they purchased that and installed that. And they also needed to upgrade their dust collection system because of some new sales strategies that they were implementing. Linden in the past has always sold more brick and mortar type retail outlets. Over the last 5 or 6 years, they've actually started to sell more online e-commerce type retailers like Williams and Sonoma and Room and Board and some others. So they preferred to go that route, knowing that they could produce their furniture in advance and have it ready and waiting for these e-commerce companies to come and purchase. So the fact that they were able to streamline their process of processing their lumber was a huge advantage for them. Unfortunately, like I alluded to earlier, the species that they're using prominently right now are hickory and walnut. And I was able to go in their warehouse and there was quite a bit of walnut in there. So he apologized for that, but I said, no problem. I understand that's what the customer wants and you have to give them what they want. So he alluded to the fact that, their goals that they had set in their application, they didn't quite meet initially. And that was more because of, coming out of COVID, there was this huge demand. And then within a year or two, demand has fallen off. So he's not quite met those goals that he stated, but he hopes that, things will pick up sometime next year and they'll be back running strong again. Had a long talk about the process, the WLEB application process. He was not the one that actually did the application, so he couldn't give me much feedback on that. But he basically said that everything that they signed up for, WLEB was able to accommodate them, and that they hope to apply again soon. They want to revamp their finishing portion of the plant, and they're going to need some help with that. So he had every intention of coming back for some more money. So all in all, a great hour spent with him, and I think it was a company that I'd like to see us support more going forward.
Thank you. Any questions for Chris? Thank you, Chris. Kathy? You have any updates? Elizabeth, who's done
I don't think Kathy. I think Donna.
Nope, not yet. I haven't done any yet.
Yeah, Donna, if you want to go ahead, and Oliver maybe, and then Elizabeth, Nance, I think have done some.
Yeah, I went to visit Local Donut right after our August symposium. And this is a business grant for $10,000, and they applied for it in November of 2021. So I don't even think I was on the board when it was discussed. But interestingly enough, again, a very small grant, but made a world of difference. They are a micro bakery. operating the bakery out of their home in Woodbury, and they were doing primarily donuts, and he's since expanded into doing sourdough bread under the name Full Circle Bakery. And I tell you, this guy knows his baking for sure. I learned so much about flours, and they primarily source all local grains. And I learned about how you bake bread and how you can keep it. You know, if you buy a loaf of good bread, you can put it in a cast iron Dutch oven in your house. It's the best way to keep your bread from getting stale or rubbery. Great little place. So I mean, the expansion was simply to add more space to mix and roll dough and to let the bread rise. It's again very tiny. But he's done amazing with the space, and he claims it's really helped him expand the business. Some of the data, like what they had hoped to do versus what actually happened, isn't exactly, because he didn't know at the time he applied he was going to expand into the sourdough business. So he was hoping, to increase his number of donuts delivered. And instead, that's remained kind of level. But his bread business has really taken off, and apparently he has a lot more business than he can accommodate. So that's a good thing.
That's excellent. Thank
And
you.
I think they sourced their flour from NEK Greens in Waterford, which received a Working Lands grant the same year to buy a mill for their flour. So it's cool to hear how those two businesses.
Yeah, and he
their
said
grants.
that really contributed to him being able to get more local grain at a better price, which he really likes. And he also uses Food Connects to get a lot of his ingredients delivered to him. And I think we've awarded them a grant at one time. So it was nice to see the interconnection between these businesses.
Yeah, I think they work with Rogers Farmstead too. Pretty neat. Oliver?
Thanks. Yeah, I did 2 site visits, so I'll be somewhat brief. I visited Wood and Hammer, that's a cabinet maker in Vergennes, Moncton, on July 23rd. Met with Ben Raphael. They received a $25K grant, business enhancement grant in 2023, and what he used the grant for was to purchase a CNC machine, or also known as computer numerical control. And I'll put a picture up if my computer cooperates. Hopefully folks can see, this is the machine that he purchased with the WLEB grant. And it's been sort of, he used the word transformational for his business. He was very enthusiastic, very positive about the grant. They've increased their number of clients. They've increased their efficiency. Their profits have increased significantly. They're using this machine, which is essentially like a computer-driven router, for almost all their clients now. And word is getting out, and they've picked up new clients, which he somewhat attributes to that machine. So that seems like a real success. They've met some, but not all of their expected measurable outcomes in the grant, but are continuing to make progress. The one thing that he did tell me is that he mostly uses plywood, and he buys it from Atlantic Plywood out of state, as opposed to from A. Johnson, which closed. So he's not sourcing any of his wood in Vermont, which is too bad. But I think we might see him again. He has some ideas for additional equipment he could get. So we might see applications from Ben at Wood and Hammer again. The other business I visited was Maple Wind Farm in Richmond in early July. I met with Bruce Hennessy. I think they've been a 3-time WLEB grantee. The most recent was they got a $20K COVID-19 business grant in 2020 to get a double chamber vacuum sealer and a motorized poultry slaughter line, both associated with producing, essentially poultry products for the public, and also that's sold in markets around the state. And they're used with those two things that WLEB provide and their own investments. They have a USDA chilled poultry processing facility on site. So they attributed the WLEB grant to increasing their slaughter speed by 30%. They're also able to reduce staff as a result. So I know one of our metrics is, are we increasing employment? They went in the opposite direction, but that was a positive for them. One, because they were having trouble with absenteeism and staff retention. So they were able to retain and employ the staff that wanted to stay and didn't have to replace as many staff who left. And one of their goals with the COVID-19 grant was to, prevent the spread of COVID on the job site, and these investments helped them spread people out, and they were successful in having a 0 incidence of COVID-19 spread on the job, or at least that's what they reported to us. And overall, the grant increased sales and product output. They want something called a chicken roll stock machine to modernize packaging, and we might see them again for that. So that farm is a bit of a chameleon. They've done all kinds of different things in their many decades of existence, but are focused on poultry with a small shop on site now. And they're actually not even planting some of the fields they own close to the Winooski just because of flooding. It's happened the last 2 summers, and they've moved away from using those fields, which I thought was interesting. So I'll stop there.
Looks like you're still sharing your screen, Oliver.
Sorry about that.
No worries. You can admire the CNC machine. Allison Lowe, do you want to share?
Sure, I don't have any pictures, but I visited Triple J Pastures in Irisburg early in the summer. Before their chickens had just started laying, and they were getting some pullets. They used a working man's grant to purchase a highly efficient, super efficient chicken house. And it actually had a capacity of up to about 650 chickens. So I got to tour the chicken house, and it's really cool because it's portable and it's solar powered, so they can move it around on the farm. In the winter, they do need to hook it up to a power source because they don't get as much solar power. It's self-watering, self-feeding. They can fill water tanks and in the feed tanks for several days in advance. It's also got these cool conveyor belts. The nesting boxes line both sides, and so then they crank the conveyor belts and they get the eggs out that way. And they had about 550 chickens that were already in there. Didn't say he hadn't. They were all females. So, anyways, that was really cool. It was also some roosting bars, and then the nesting boxes would close at night so that they wouldn't nest on their eggs, so that they could harvest cleaner eggs. So that was pretty cool. They had already pretty much pre-sold all of their eggs to a pasta maker. And again, they had just started harvesting. I saw a few eggs come out on the conveyor belt. But I guess later in June, then they really started harvesting big time, about more than 2,000 eggs a week. And the other thing that was really cool about this chicken house was that they have other livestock. So as they move it around, they can improve the soils for forage for other crops. So it's very innovative and super efficient, time-saving way of keeping very happy and very clean chickens. And the chickens looked very happy too. They were in an area that probably had about several acres where they could still go out and peck around. I was amazed how friendly they were, like trying to jump up in my lap kind of friendly. But yeah, it was a nice visit.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions regarding site visits or any others that wish to share? All right, so we're going to move on to administration updates and
Oh, wait, Allison, sorry, can I just say
yeah.
one more thing on the site
Yeah,
visit?
absolutely.
Yeah, just thank you everyone who has done those. And for folks that haven't signed up, which I think is just a few people, I was planning to just reach out and provide some that are in your area that you can opt into if you would like. And yeah, just I think it's really, really important for grantees to be able to meet with folks and know that the board is made up of real people like you that are thinking about these things and interacting with them and willing to get feedback. And also, hopefully, it sounds like it's been meaningful for all of you to be able to be on site. And yeah, I know for me, it always helps me remember why we do all these things. So just wanted to add that.
Excellent. All right, so we'll move over to administration updates. And the first thing that's on my mind is the biggie is currently running 13th through the 29th. So this was our first weekend of the fair in Massachusetts. Eastern States Exposition, if you haven't been, I would encourage you to somehow fit it into your schedule one of these years. It's a nice large fair that has a lot to offer. Many of our 4-H kids are down there, the youth showing and doing judging contests, etc. So pretty interesting. And then we also have the Avenue of the States, and Vermont has, in my opinion, the best state building on the Avenue of States, but I'm a little partial. We have some wonderful vendors in there. For years, it'd been very just the same and not a lot of change. And I'll say since COVID, there's been a lot of change in the building of not only vendors, but the layout, and the atmosphere is much different. So it's just a neat place to visit, and very positive and upbeat. So we have staff down there for the full duration in our State of Vermont building. We're currently building budgets and working on our legislative proposals. So if there's something on your mind that you wish to speak about, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Also, BGAP, which is the Business Emergency Gap Assistance Program for agriculture and non-ag businesses, is open. There is additional funding for 2023 for those that have already received funding that applied last year. There is, I believe, 10% additional in payment. And then also 2024 funding for those affected by flooding. Those applications are due by November 15th. The ones looking for the further funding for the 2023, the applications are due by September 30th. And my understanding that the 2024 is first come, first serve. So important that we note that. There's other grant opportunities open right now. We have our RFSI equipment only grant, which is closing soon, October 1st. Farm to Institution Development Grant webinar coming up. And we have an innovation in dairy processing and packing grant deadline of October 31st. So a lot going on. I know Abby is participating without video, and I don't want to put her on the spot if she's not in an area with good reception, but I am going to just ask if Abby has anything to add.
Thanks, Allison. I think that was a pretty good admin update from the Agency of Ag. Yeah, I don't think that I have anything else. I guess actually the one thing around the BGAP, I would say there's actually the opportunity for 3 different applications. If you're talking with businesses, they can apply for 2024
losses from floods this summer, they can apply. If they never applied in 2023 for whatever reason, there's an open opportunity for them to apply for losses in 2023 if they didn't previously receive an award. And that's the deadline that closes, as Allison said, on October 1st or the end of September. And then there's an opportunity for folks that did receive awards in 2023 but have had sustained losses or want to apply for a supplemental award. They can also submit that inquiry of interest to the Agency of Commerce and Agency of Ag via the same application portal. And after all those new applications of 2023 losses are reviewed, then we'll look at whatever remaining funds there are and process as best we can those supplemental requests. So we know that there's businesses out there that we haven't seen apply for BGAP in the ag community, and I suspect in the non-ag sector, just based upon, including forestry, based upon the survey results that we've seen for losses and damages. So as you talk with businesses, I guess I would just encourage you to, remind them of the BGAP funding opportunity. Encourage them to reach out to the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation, Melissa Monty and her team, Miss Melissa Bounty and her team, if they have questions, or contact the Agency of Ag directly. But I guess that would be it for now. Thanks.
Excellent. And in recent news, you may have seen there's a letter from EPA that has gone to the Agency of Natural Resources in regards to our water quality inspection program. And the agency has 90 days to reply to EPA on a corrective action to assist with creating a permit program for the confined animal feeding operations. And that would be, in simpler terms, a program that is meant for those that may have a direct discharge. So currently, the non-point source, as we call it, is a program that we run through the agency, and the CAFO program has been under Agency of Natural Resources. So we will be working with the Agency of Natural Resources and EPA to hopefully correct the action that has been put forward. Their letter put 4 options out there, of which 2 I don't believe really stand as options. One is to leave the program as is, which we know is not currently serving the way that it was supposed to, and the other is to let EPA take over the regulation of these programs and oversight of the farms, which EPA doesn't wish to. So the other 2 choices is for the program to be run solely out of A&R or do a bifurcated program with the Agency of Natural Resources and Ag. So we will continue in those responses. You'll probably see it in the media for months to come, but just know that we're working diligently to come up with a program that's compliant with the Clean Water Act. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those as time goes on. I will turn it over to FPR for an update.
Thanks, Allison. Let's see. We've just completed a damage survey from the July floods, had about 300 respondents, mostly private forest landowners, but maybe 20% forest economy businesses. And a preliminary review of the data, which will require some cleaning, is there's about $5 million in damage estimates to forest properties, infrastructure damage, or economic losses as a result of the flood. But again, the lion's share is the infrastructure damage. So that's just a useful piece of information. I know Ag has done something similar already for what the damages that farmers suffered, and we'll use that as we think about recovery options. Along those lines, there's beginning to be some movement towards a emergency forest restoration program, call for applications for affected landowners who have non-industrial private forest land or infrastructure on that land that was damaged and meets certain criteria. And from the July 2023 flood, we had about 50 emergency forest restoration program applications, and we are expecting more from 2024 if the call for applications does indeed materialize as we think it will. What else? We're in fall foliage season. You may have seen some media about that as well. And it's gonna, our forest health program manager Josh Hallman, who knows about this, has forecast a fantastic fall foliage season. So hopefully you'll have a chance to get out and appreciate it. But all the indicators are sort of lining up for a good display of color over the next coming few weeks. We received a $5 million Inflation Reduction Act grant to work with private landowners on managing their forests for climate resiliency. And we're beginning to, we don't have the signed agreement in hand yet, but we're getting to mobilize to implement that. Part of that is we've requested a number of positions, limited service or term positions to help us implement that grant. When that request is with the governor and joint fiscal office now, but hopefully that'll be approved, and we look forward to beginning to implement that grant and working directly with landowners to support climate resiliency, also working with foresters and loggers to help them implement those types of practices and their pieces of the sort of forest product supply chain. We had some transition in our county forester ranks. We lost 3 people earlier this year, but we've now hired 3 replacements. I mean, Charlie Hancock is one, Mark Reishart is another, and we're about to announce who's our new Windsor County forester, probably by the end of this week. But that person's just informing their current employer. So we're excited that we've completed this county forester recruitment, and those folks, if not already up and running, will soon be up and running to work directly with forest landowners and implementing current use and other parts of their work. A few more things. We're getting ready to put out an RFP that would hopefully lead to the hiring of a service provider to implement the $1 million of payments to loggers to help them comply with AMPs. So this is funding that the legislature gave us for this state fiscal year budget, and we're allowed to make direct payments to loggers to help them comply with AMP requirements and or implement what is written in budget as climate. They don't use the word resiliency. I think they use climate adaptation practices. And in addition to that, we're also hoping to get a $500,000 grant from the Forest Service to provide loggers with crane mats, which are mats that help them negotiate wet areas on logging sites and landings on skid trails, and reduce soil impacts and erosion once those crane mats are laid down temporarily during the logging job. So those are just 2 small things we're doing to help loggers get into the woods and increase the number of days of operating, which have been really reduced over the past couple of years because of warm winters and wet summers. Just 2 more points. We're about to announce we're about to actually, I guess, come out with a final version of the Worcester Range Long Range Management Plan. This was a plan that when we put it out in draft, received a lot of comments from the public about how we're going to manage the various forests that comprise the Worcester Range Management Unit. It's a mix of state forests and game management areas. We had about 700 comments on the draft plan, largely in opposition to any logging on public lands. With the draft plan had put about 50% of the Worcester Range into conservation and mostly passive management. 30% was just being held for future management plans, and 20% of the Worcester Range, actually no, I'm off by an order of magnitude, 10%, only 10% of the Worcester Range was going to be logged over the 20-year period of the plan. And even with that, what I felt was a very restrained approach, the plan still met a lot of opposition from the public. And so we fielded the 700 comments, and we've made some changes to the plan as a result. And there'll be a press release coming out on the 22nd or 23rd, linking to the final version of the plan and a lot of information about that. And one of the things that sort of is accompanying efforts to do planning for individual forests, which identifies recreation, timber sale, and other conservation work that'll be done on those individual forests. We're also coming up with a statewide planning rule that'll govern how we develop plans and provide some sort of statewide approaches which can be used at forests that don't have plans. And our first pre-rulemaking public meeting about that was last night. And there'll be more of those to come. And then finally, we're seeing a lot of beech leaf disease, which is a newish disease, newish to Vermont, that's affecting beech trees. It's caused by a worm-like nematode. It's already been detected in at least 4 Vermont counties. I'm kind of lost track of the when a county is officially included on the list, but it's certainly been observed in more than 4 counties, but confirmed in 4 counties. And that's in some of our neighboring states. That's having significant impacts on beech trees, beech mortality. And assuming it affects Vermont's forests the way it has on other states nearby, it'll sort of prevent most beech species. Well, it'll kill eventually most beech trees and prevent regeneration. And so our forests will look a lot different in 10 to 20 years if beech leaf disease has the same impact here that other states have had. So there isn't much we can do to prevent it yet, but we're sort of watching the science and management and seeing if there's anything that comes online that can help us prevent the spread of beech leaf disease. Mostly now we're just trying to track its spread and inform the public about what's going on. So I'll stop there, Allison. Happy to take any questions on any of that.
Thank you. Any questions for Oliver? All right, so we'll turn it over to Elizabeth for an ACCD update.
I will be much more brief. I didn't get a chance to get with Tate. He has COVID, poor man, again. I think the only thing I have is just to reiterate the BGAP, not to beat a dead horse, but we have not a lot of applications. I think part of it is 24 didn't see the magnitude of flooding across the state as 23. But again, 23 flood victims are eligible. We actually are prioritizing those because we're trying to use up those residuals. So if you know anybody, doesn't have to be in a FEMA disaster zone, anybody affected by flooding, please have them check into that. That's me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Any other
This is Abby.
announcements? Go ahead, Abby.
Jump in for a quick second. I just wanted to make sure, Oliver, that forest businesses that had responded to your survey were looking at the BGAP program as a possible funding source for recovery of their physical losses.
I hope they are. We've certainly we've disseminated information about it, encouraged folks to apply for the businesses that aren't as familiar with using computers. We've offered direct assistance. I was fortunate to go out to Dave's sawmill with Secretary Curley of ACCD. They're in Hardwick, and they were, damaged by floods, both 24 and 23, lost a lot of inventory, damage to equipment, and they're either going to submit an application and we'll assist them, or they're going to pursue a buyout and either hang it up or try to relocate out of the floodplain. But that's the type of business that we've offered support to if they need it for a BGAP applications.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Any other announcements, public comment? Not hearing any. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Thank you, Oliver. Do we have a second?
I can second that.
Thank you, Bob. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Go enjoy some sunshine, folks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.